Failure is one of the most important parts of your life. The brain remembers failure more often than it will remember success, at least if your brain works like mine does. And if it does, it will replay your failures in your head as you try to sleep, as you try to enjoy a concert, or as you look into a loved one's eyes. Failure reeks off of you, in your mind and on your body. You feel like a failure and a fraud, no matter how you live or where you go, because you've already made many of the biggest mistakes in your life, and your brain wants it to happen again, so it can point to those moments and say, "See, I always knew you couldn't do better." This is the brain of our protagonist in Disco Elysium, an alcoholic who has hurt many people and has abused alcohol to such an excess, he wakes up one day in a trash hotel room within the city of Revachol, with no memory of who he is or how he got there. You slowly piece together that you were investigating a murder, and instead of solving it, you've been drinking. It is one of the most unique starts in video game history, and it grabbed me when I first played it and never let me go. And so I try to help our protagonist be better. I help him solve a murder, get his partner Kim Kitsuraki to trust us, and help to take down racists, and speak up for the people who don't have the power to speak for themselves. I raised churches, made friends, discovered old enemies and new, and above all else, I had a hell of a time. Disco Elysium: The Final Cut is a CRPG in the spirit of games like Planetscape Torment and wears its influence on its sleeves. Its just gorgeous art style is inspired by people like Jenny Saville and Alex Brenigar, and the ideological influences were stated in refreshing honesty at the 2019 Game Awards, where it won the awards for Fresh Indie Game, RPG, Independent Game, and Narrative. There, ZA/UM Studio dedicated their wins to, among others, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Not unlike our world, communism in Disco Elysium is associated with failure. It's no surprise then that I gravitated towards that archetype, as well as the sorry cop archetype, which felt startlingly true to life when compared to my everyday interactions with others. On my first playthrough in the original, I was also a feminist cop to boot. This time around, I was a bit of a Renaissance cop, and took other archetypes, like normal cop and art cop, among other usual suspects. These are all part of your thought cabinet, which gives you certain bonuses and defects, and the cop archetypes are not the only thoughts you can internalize. You can also think about where you were born, if you were done with drinking or not, or any other number of wild thoughts with haunting illustrations. It's an intimidating system at first glance, and the UI could be a little finicky at times, but once you got used to it, it is one of the most interesting ways I've seen used for character development in a game. It is similar to the defect system in the Outer Worlds, but much better thought out and integrated into gameplay. Whereas in the Outer Worlds, I never bothered with perks or defects. I nearly had a complete thought cabinet by the end of my runs in Disco Elysium. That said, this is not a particularly long game, perhaps taking you around 20 hours to complete, if not less, depending on your choices, how exhaustive you are, and what stats you start with. Personally, I could have stayed in Revachol a bit longer, but I cannot say the length is bad either, especially given how many different choices you can make in the game, and how many different builds you can create for your detective in the game. The replayability for this one is high. In that time, however, you will be constantly bombarded by the mistakes of your protagonist's past. You'll have to reconcile the fact that you were a cop with very little knowledge of who you are, who you were, and what you should do next in short order. Not to mention the fact that when you wake up in your absolutely destroyed hotel room, you'll discover you have misplaced a few key items that may take a while to track down. These tasks can feel like they are never going to be accomplished, which makes it all the sweeter when they are. Throughout all of this, you may take morale, psychological, or health, physical, damage if you roll your 2d6, that is to say, 2 dice that are 6-sided, poorly. This makes the game feel different to popular role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons. The game uses your stats as bonuses as well as clothes you can wear, or choose to not wear, and mixes them in with your chance of success and failure. Success always feels great, but failure, even when you have a 92% chance rate, or even a 97%, can be just as narratively rewarding at times. But as is customary in video games, you can only have so much failure, especially at the beginning of the game due to your smaller health/psych pool. So saving early and often is never a bad idea, even if some want to call it save scumming. Unfortunately, when it comes to the final cut, saving early and often bit some players in the long run, as they would run into corrupted saves down the line. I never had this problem, thankfully, but I did notice many other bugs and glitches within the PS4 port of the game. For instance, because Disco Elysium is a CRPG, there's a lot of pointing and clicking on the PC, which equates to a lot of pressing X on the PS4 controller. During my time playing, issues like item examinations taking more than a single press were prominent, but those issues have since been patched out. That said, crashes may still happen from time to time on your adventure. That said, the main features of this new Final Cut are the political side quests and the full voice acting. So how do they stack up? Well, the full voice acting might be a bit misleading, as occasionally voice lines do not come in, or some side characters may not have received the VO treatment. But otherwise, it's largely excellent across the board. A few voice actors were changed since the original, and most of the changes are fine, if not a little jarring at times, for anyone who has played the original PC release. As for the political side quest, as I mentioned, I was a communist cop, and while I won't spoil what happens, let's say it's pretty standard fare side quest in Disco Elysium. Lots of talking, and lots of interesting discussion while that talking is happening. It felt completely in line with the rest of the game, and it shows that this was truly something they wanted to include in the original version, but just couldn't find the time. And that is what makes the Final Cut such a welcome sight. Because, aside from the political quest and full voice acting, this is largely the same Disco Elysium you likely fell in love with if you played the original on PC, plus a whole host of minor, and even a few major improvements. The writing is top-notch, the discussions are painful and poignant, and you really do feel like you have some level of control over the choices that happen and the way the ending gets played out. For that feat alone, Disco Elysium, and especially this new Final Cut version, deserves all the praise in the world.